morning, everyone. We appreciate you tuning in to this special session designed to address all the queries CPAs often have about nearshore outsourcing. My name is Trevor Morlock, AVP Client Success here at QXAS. I'm joined today by two esteemed colleagues, Mike Walton, our Senior VP of Strategic Growth, and Marco Jimenez, who heads our operations in Mexico. So Mike and Marco, over to you all for a quick introduction.
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Mike Walton. I'm Senior Vice President for QX Accounting Services. I work primarily with CPA firms throughout the US and Canada. My goal is to work with firms to strategically figure out the best ways forward for creating capacity and building profitable growth. That's my goal, and I'll hand it off to Marco.
Hey everyone, this is Marco Jimenez. I'm the head of the Center of Operations here for QX in Guadalajara, Mexico. It's been 1 year since I joined QX in this role, and I'm happy to share all the great information that we've prepped for you guys in terms of why nearshoring is a great opportunity, and it's a great solution for accounting firms in the United States at this point. So thank you for joining, and hopefully that we can touch base on all the points and all the questions that you may have.
Perfect. Thank you, Marco and Mike, for the introductions. And to everyone in the audience, we'll be addressing all your queries. So please share your questions in the chat box and we will answer them accordingly. So to kick things off, let's set some context here. So Mike, everyone in this room has heard about outsourcing, but very few have followed its evolution journey. Outsourcing was equivalent to offshoring at one point of time, and now we have hybrid models coming in. We'd love to hear more about it from you.
Sure, thanks, Trevor. Yeah, the model has changed, and it's evolved over the years, and much of that evolution has really come from feedback from clients, and then as the needs of the CPA firms and the clients out there have changed, obviously the model has changed, and a lot of that has really been, the last 3 or 4 years, just amazing amounts of changes, because there's been such an absolute strain on staffing in CPA firms. The hiring challenges, everybody on this call knows all about it. I talk with firms day in and day out. I get people saying, hey, I need somebody yesterday. And then I get firms saying, hey, we want to build a long-term strategy. So the needs continue to absolutely change. We at QX, we really work sort of on this managed solution that has a great deal. It sort of focuses on built-in review, it focuses on governance, it focuses on backup for resources. It's seamless if something changes or someone leaves. It focuses on reporting, and it really focuses on the quality and the client feedback and success. That's part of that evolution because that's been demanded by the CPA firms. From a hybrid perspective, and this is where things are getting interesting, Mexico are sort of the people resource centers of the world now. So what we're seeing is this hybrid of, what I call mixed teams, or a hybrid solution where we'll have a team from India and a team from Mexico. And I was actually talking to a firm the other day, a very large firm, and he brought up, he made a comment that I quite honestly hadn't really thought of, but it makes perfect sense. He says, with the Mexico and the India, basically I get 24-hour work coverage, right? Which makes perfect sense. You have Mexico for that 9 to 5, that normal work, those normal work hours here in the US. And then you have that India team working, while we're asleep or while we're, at home watching TV or something like that. The job is getting done. So it's that 24-hour coverage, and that mixed team, I think, gives a really nice opportunity. I want to delve a little bit in, and I don't want to take up a ton of time, but, Mexico, everybody understands the reasons why Mexico and nearshoring is valuable. Obviously, we talked about the time zone and things like that, but I want everybody to think a little bit about the cultural affinities, the cultural similarities between Mexico and the US. Hispanic culture has been part of the US heritage as long as there's been a US and before, right? So it's been ingrained in our culture, and it's the closeness leads to a lot of familiarity and a lot of comfort. They're also our second largest trading partner behind Canada, 324 billion in exports to Mexico last year alone. The big number that I really think is interesting is, in 2022, Mexico had 466,000 accountants. Okay. In that same year, the US had 665. Okay, well, there's a difference there, right? Obviously, the US should be larger, but think about the fact that the US is 157% larger in terms of population than Mexico. We're talking almost 3 times the size of Mexico population, and only a couple 100,000 less in terms of accountants. So that professional staff, that professional grouping in Mexico has turned out to be a really strong up-and-comer when it comes to outsourcing and offshoring, and now with Mexico, nearshoring. So that's a quick context. We can talk a little bit more about the model, and certainly if anybody has questions about that. But the combining of that India and that nearshoring in Mexico is really creating a lot of exciting opportunities for firms out there, Trevor.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mike. And Roxana, I see your question as well in the chat. We do have a bit towards the end where we're going to answer any questions. So we'll plan to address that here shortly. Thank you for the question, and feel free to ask any other questions you might have as we're going along here with the initial conversation. But over to Marco. So with the current global economic landscape, why is Mexico emerging as a prominent nearshoring destination?
Great question, Trevor. Well, first of all, location, right? We're in a very strategic geographical location, right next door to the United States. And also, we serve as the prime, I would say this distributor from the Latin America side of the world over also to the United States. Second is the skilled workforce. At a very competitive labor cost as well. Let me give you some stats that perhaps not everyone knows about Mexico labor and in general, the amount of hours that Mexico puts in per capita every year. It is calculated based on recent polls that the average worker in Mexico works over 2,200 hours per year. That's 43 hours per week. In comparison to, for example, to the United States, that's over 9 hours per week higher. That's something that puts us in a very again competitive status across the entire region. Mexico becomes a prime location. Now, in terms of the stability and the infrastructure development, we have a network of free trade agreements across the board. I'm pretty sure that everyone is familiar with NAFTA. NAFTA allows us to also apply for a specific visa. For example, there's multiple firms that have asked at some point if there's the possibility of sending resources from Mexico to the United States. To support onshore work, that's something available for Mexico, and that visa process, it's 3 times, 4 times, as faster and easier to obtain versus the regular, working visas across the rest of the world. Now, number 3, companies are drawn here too by the proximity to the U.S., reducing logistic costs and enabling real-time collaboration. I'll give you some examples of big companies that are working just nearby. I'm located again in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. Consider the new Silicon Valley of Latin America. And the reason why is because we have Oracle, HP, IBM, Dell, DHL, Intel, Cisco, all the major companies out there in terms of technology and logistics have, some type of presence here. Either they have a manufacturing or software development hub or, a logistics hub, GBS, for example. So There's Mexico becoming kind of like the leader for nearshoring. Has to do with location, and it has to do with this other two factors: the skilled workforce and the very competitive labor cost.
Fascinating. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And Marco, why do you think Mexico has become the hot spot for nearshoring?
Well, again, going back to the macroeconomical factors, Mexico is the second largest economy, I'm sorry, within Latin America, and the 15th largest globally, right? Piggybacking on some of the stats that that Mike was sharing, there's currently 465,000 registered accountants in Mexico in the labor market. Again, in comparison, U.S. has a little bit over 650,000, with 62% more population than Mexico. Not only that, but also every single year we receive to the labor market roughly between 25 and 30,000 more accountants that graduate every year across public and private universities in Mexico. And that number is very interesting because it has been reasonably steady across the last 5 to 10 years. And when you compare that to the United States in that particular sector, unfortunately, accountants are not as available, and accounting as a degree in the United States has become less and less popular, right? So what we can see there is a big opportunity for Mexico to support the United States with resources that are graduating every single year, and trying to fill that, not only the local market and the local labor market domestically, but also internationally. And then I would say that within the last couple of years, the Mexican government has realized of the big opportunity that nearshore will provide to local companies in Mexico. So there has been some announcements in terms of incentives that will be promoted, will be approved for the upcoming years for companies that do some type of nearshoring.
Okay, perfect. Very cool. That makes sense. And so, Mike, question for you: how does nearshoring, particularly in Mexico, benefit CPA firms in the USA in terms of outsourcing accounting services?
Yeah, so I would venture to guess that there are firms on this call right now that have people that are on staff that are working, in their home office or sitting at their kitchen table, and they could be down the street, across town, across state, or across the country, right? So basically Mexico, with that nearshore location, right, with the closeness of Mexico, with the time zone, basically you are creating basically a new remote employee. They just happen to be living in Mexico, right? So that's one of the easiest ways. We already understand Hispanic culture. We already are familiar with Hispanic accents and that kind of thing. All of our people in our Mexico office are fluent in English, if not native, certainly close to being native in their English abilities. So basically, you get all that, and then plus you get that similarity of that culture, right? They understand that the Mexico CPA is not that different than a U.S. CPA. They have to jump through the same hoops. They understand the same principles when it comes to accounting, right? So you're getting that resource that's much more familiar to that US resource, right? So that's probably the number one thing. It creates this comfort. Again, a majority of our work is going to be with India, and that'll always be the same because it's just such a wealth of human talent and experience in India. So we understand that. But Mexico gives you that option. Mexico also gives you that option to combine those Mexico resources that maybe you might want to have client facing, right? As opposed, so they might take some of that higher level client facing role while you have some of that lower level work leverage to India. That's something that we certainly have seen some clients do. One of the things I like about Mexico culture, and Marco and I have talked about this, and I was lucky enough in October to go spend a few days with Marco down at the Guadalajara office. And first of all, the energy, the excitement, the knowledge, the passion was really interesting to see. Mexico focuses much more, Mexico workers focus much more on a collective, right? Whereas the US might be a little bit more on the individualistic side of things. And I think we probably have all seen examples of that. That's not to say US aren't good with teams, but I think Mexico works well within teams. They understand that team concept. They come from a history of collective work. They from a cultural perspective, working as a team is very, very important to them. You know, obviously the communication, the collaboration, all the elements contained under the, hey, it's the same time zone umbrella. And there's a lot of elements. You know, we might just be thinking, well, hey, it's great that if I'm at my US firm here in Virginia and it's 4:00 in the afternoon and I have some questions, I know it's, 10 and a half hours ahead in India, so they're probably asleep. But man, it's nice to be able to shoot an email or pick up the phone and talk to a resource in Mexico and actually have them be able to respond and are working at the same hours. Those are absolutely crucial. But that collaboration, because you're able to have that same time zone, you get to have that team approach, right? So they can start to feel a little bit more, as I said earlier, as just part of your outsourced team, just your extended team, I guess, instead of even using the word outsource. They're part of your extended remote team. They just happen to be sitting on the other side of the border or in Guadalajara or Mexico City, right? Also, though, and we see this a lot, we've had many of our clients travel to India to see their teams, to meet their teams. This is, and I'm working with a firm right now that as soon as they were just about ready to sign them and they're going to have a team from Mexico, we've already talked about them bringing their Mexico team up to their office and then them also going down to Guadalajara to meet Marco and the team. So your travel time, it's much easier, it's shorter, it's a little bit less expensive, obviously, than hopping on a plane to India. So there's some really important things here. And again, I would just sort of double back a little bit because I've had these conversations with CPA firms and actually hearing them talk about this and hearing them rationalize and understand and appreciate the nearshore opportunities. If you have remote workers right now, that worker in Mexico is going to be exactly the same. They might work for QX and it's an outsourcing partnership, certainly, but it's going to be part of that team. They just happen to be in Mexico. I think everybody probably has their own ideas about what makes nearshoring a benefit, but those are some things that certainly are true. And they're true because we've heard it from clients and we've heard it as we've had these discussions on nearshoring. There's an absolute excitement about it. It might offer CPAs opportunities to expand service offerings depending on what kind of talent. And at the end of the day, it's still an outsourcing strategy. So while Mexico might have higher costs from a monthly perspective than maybe an India resource due to just cost of living and the differences between the two countries, it's still outsourcing, and therefore these resources are going to cost considerably less than a US-based resource. So you have that profitability, which is a key element of outsourcing as well. It's not one we talk about a lot, and it's not something I actually lead with when I have discussions, but it's certainly a factor when we're talking about profitable growth. So you get this access to qualified, experienced individuals in Mexico, and you're able to create capacity and bring these people on as your team members and also create those opportunities for growth. As I said before, and I'll say again, and if I've run into anybody on this call at any of the area BDO meetings or the BDO conference or anything like that, the one thing I've learned, and I've been around outsourcing for a few years now, outsourcing is an absolute growth engine. Whether it's Mexico or India, it's a growth engine because of all those benefits. And nearshoring just kind of makes those benefits closer and maybe a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, let me piggyback on that, Mike. Yep. If you allow me to, because I think that you touched base on one very important point, which is the cultural affinity factor, it's not a nice to have. It's an essential factor for a team to succeed. At the end of the day, talking the same language when it comes to not really, the wording, but the cultural side, being able to trust someone that knows, your personal preferences, your hobbies, your sports, favorite team. Those things create cohesive teams, right? And cohesive teams deliver better results, are more open to receive feedback. They're more inclined to look for areas of improvement because they have the confidence to do so. So I wanted to highlight that point because it's one of the biggest factors that I believe are truly a game changer when it comes to having a person that speaks the same language, if that makes sense.
And Marco, this next question I'm going to have for you as well. But prior to doing that, I know we have some time set aside at the end for Q&A, but we've had a couple questions that I figured we could go ahead and answer right now.
Yeah, sure. We had a question early on about if there's tax implications about paying into Mexico, and I think the understanding there might have been that you're actually paying you're paying directly that Mexico resource. Basically, with an outsourced arrangement, CPA firms partner with QX, so that resource in Mexico is an employee of QX. Another question that I got, which is really interesting, and I think it kind of it's an anonymous attendee, which is fine. Basically, the question was, if you've already started outsourcing in India and have some struggles due to time zone differences, language barrier, culture, when do you throw in the towel with India and try Mexico? Seems like we'd be starting all over again. Really, really good question. And you know what? We've run into those types of things before, but this is a great opportunity. And I think when I started off, I talked about that hybrid model, right? So those India resources that this anonymous attendee has might be doing great work, right? But it's just, hey, the differences, the language. And again, we get it. And I think there's ways to overcome that. There's certainly discussions that you can have with your outsource provider. But this is a fantastic opportunity to look at that hybrid team. Have that Mexico resource, bring a Mexico resource onto your team, keep the India team, have that Mexico resource be a liaison. That Mexico resource can also work with the India team, but then that Mexico resource can be maybe a senior level or a manager level to kind of manage the team, can be a little bit more client facing. And that Mexico resource could then work with you to be that key communication cog on the team. So there again, that's a really good opportunity for you to explore that hybrid solution. And look, if at the end of the day, if you feel like you need to throw in the towel with India, reach out, and you and I can certainly have a conversation about how that works and how other firms have made transitions. But this is a really good opportunity to kind of mold the nearshore and the offshore together. And it's a perfect example and a perfect opportunity for it. So anonymous attendee, hopefully I answered your question.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike, for answering those questions. And so, Marco, for CPA firms considering nearshoring, what are the crucial factors they should consider before making this transition?
Wow, what a great question. Well, first of all, I think that we spoke about the human factor, right? And that's a key element, of course. But moving on to the next things that firms should look at, I think that the first thing will be prioritizing factors like data security, infosec, that you trust the provider to be able to deliver regulatory compliance, that are compliant with infosec measurements like ICO 27001, or that are able to confirm a SOC audit. I mean, those are things that are crucial, right? Because we're talking about, again, very confidential information. So I think that that's number one. Number two, assess the vendor's track record. I mean, the reputation of the company, the infrastructure that they can provide, through technology. What other tools are available besides that FTE that is going to be part of an extension of your team. And I think that the third one will be the scalability factor. If you're talking about a provider that is only going to be able to deliver 1 or 2 FTEs and that's it, or is going to be able to deliver perhaps temporary solutions for you if that becomes a need at some point. And also the reputation at the local market. I think it's very important to know who you're dealing with, since you don't want the provider to deliver a person today, and then the next 3 months that person changes, or the next 6 months there's another person replacing that original person, and that becomes of course an issue when the provider doesn't have a good reputation in the market, because that will translate in attrition, and that will translate in a headache in terms of the business continuity. So I think that those are the key elements. And if I could close with the fourth one, it could be building a strong communication framework. I think that again, the time zones are super important, but not only that, but just being able to trust your vendor on a day-to-day operations, with the person that you're hiring, but also that there's also a clear escalation path in whenever things are going south, that the client has a very clear understanding on who to reach in the case that there's something that needs to change, there's something that needs to be adjusted, and that the vendor is able to provide that with a very clear expectation, right? I think that those will be the main factors that I would consider.
Excellent. Thank you, Marco. And moving on now to the actual execution. Marco, I'm sure our audience wants to understand the nearshoring process, like hiring, selection, onboarding, timelines, etc. Can you please elaborate more on the nearshoring process?
Sure. So first off, let me share something that perhaps the audience is not aware of. But in Mexico, the notice period, it's very short. Usually, it's an average of 15 days, 2 weeks. So this makes very easy to get the ball rolling when it comes to attracting talent and making sure that we start a project with very tight deadline, right? Now at QX, we've streamlined the hiring process and the hiring and the selection process so that we constantly look for candidates and maintain a ready pool of skill and experienced professionals. So we definitely have a bench of resources available at all times that we can present at any point. And those resources, like I said, if they get selected and if we let them know that there's going to be a project for them, again, going back to the notice period, it only takes 15 days for those resources to be ready to be onboarded. Now the third point is we know that the pool of candidates that are available in Mexico are for specifically CPAs are within 3 main areas. The general CPA, the tax resource, and also the audit resource. And those 3 are the ones that we're constantly looking for and that are really available within the market, because there's both Mexican firms and international firms that have those resources available. So I think those are the key points. Now, if I can quickly break down the kind of like the steps to implement nearshoring your accounting practice in 5 steps. Let me give you those 5 so you can have an idea on how would that work. So the first step here will be defining the requirement and the scope of work. First off, defining what task you need to be outsourced. Be very specific in this stage, since everything else will follow if you really set the expectations clear since day one, right? Now the second point will be the hiring and selection of these accountants. Select, of course, the right accountants for your firm based on your needs. And we may have, like I said, 4 or 5 different candidates for every position. You will have the opportunity to interview all the candidates that are available so that you can select the best fit for your firm. The next point will be the contract sign-off. So once we've found a match, we'll sit down and review and sign the contract. My personal advice is make sure that all the terms align with your expectations, of course. And then number 4, onboarding and training. After we sign the contract and we get the person on board, we take the time to train that resource in basic expectations in terms of how to work remotely with your firm. What are the basic expectations in terms of the administration of the work, systems, anything that has to do with prepping that person for success since day one. So we take care of that part as well before even jumping into your processes or the expectations that you have on your side as a client. And then finally, point number 5, updates and reviews. We definitely recommend set up regular check-ins for performance and of course updates, anything that you would like to that person to be updated on in terms of internal communications that you may have with the rest of your team. For us, it's a key element because at the end of the day, we want that relationship to last longer than maybe your initial expectation. Maybe you thought that resource was gonna only support you for 1 year, 2 years. We know that longer relationships at the end of the day deliver better results. So the feedback process, it's something that we encourage since day one, and we definitely will support you with that as well. Hopefully that answered the question, Trevor.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. Thank you for walking through the processes. And so now that we know the process, Mike, what does the firm need to do to prepare for outsourcing?
Yeah, it certainly is process driven, and QX is a process driven company, and I know CPA firms are process driven. I want to jump back real quick to something just to piggyback on what Marco was saying about the talent and that we're seeing from Mexico right now. First of all, I have been amazed at how many resources I've seen, CVs and resumes I've seen with advanced degrees. Also, a great many of the resources that we see coming from Mexico have some really solid Big Four and national firm experience. All the Big Fours and national firms have offices down in Guadalajara and Mexico City. So, there's a absolutely amazing amount of experience. As a matter of fact, I sent a CV to actually a BDO Alliance firm member. I sent them a CV and this was an audit partner responded back to me and said that she has not seen a CV that complete with that much experience come through even on her US based searches for auditors. So it just kind of gives you an idea, an example. I just wanted to throw that in, but yeah, so I mean, Marco, I think you did a good job on really sort of nailing down the process. And, quite honestly, outsourcing is and should be relatively simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's simple. And our goal is to not complicate things and to make it as easy as possible. So, there's some things I think the firm has to do. And a lot of this is trial and error. But we've seen a lot of things. I've seen a lot of things, and I know that there's some attributes that probably need to be in place, and there's some things that a firm has to do and probably should be doing as they kind of either as they start this outsourcing or nearshoring journey, or even if they're getting close, they should probably. So first of all, I think you want to make sure that internally everything is aligned. Buy-in is absolutely crucial. Make sure that leadership understands it, but also make sure your team understands it, and make sure it's important to communicate with your team. Secondly, take a look at the lay of the land. What needs to be outsourced? What can be outsourced? What is the scope of work? What types of jobs would best benefit the firm if they were outsourced, or if you brought on an outsourced team to handle some of those tasks. So really take some time to look at the tasks that you'd be transferring over. If we have these clear definitions, if we have job descriptions, that really sort of makes the rest of the process smoother. And one thing I would say to everybody out here, if you are thinking about outsourcing, or if you come talk to me or any outsourced provider, they're probably going to ask you for a job description. So make sure you have that list of desired